All right, before we go on our virtual graffiti alley tour, I want to have the opportunity to sort of tell you about some of the artists that you will see on our virtual tour, some that we've seen in the past, and just some history of some of the writers that have been there. So, Toronto's a big city, and a lot of the graffiti started around in about the 1980s. And one of the key figures in this was a guy named Ren. And I just want to premise this that. I mean, I don't know everything about the graffiti writer. This is just stuff that I've sort of discovered from reading, going to Graffiti Alley, talking to some writers, but it's not necessarily like there's books out there and there's like histories available. So it's hard to find the information. But if you do ever see some pieces by Ren, and I think there is still one piece that I've seen just by the food trucks, I think it was Ren. He's one of the old school, guys. So he is influenced from New York when he went down to New York and did a trip there, and then sort of brought that back to Toronto. So it did spread to other major cities. And when he was writing in Toronto, nobody else was writing, so he self-taught, although his parents were artists. One of the crews that he was in was TCM crew, which means the Crime Messiahs, or DOH crew, which is the Dukes of Hazzard. And in Graffiti Alley, you're actually going to see quite a few writers that still are with the DOH crew. I've just noticed that there's a lot of graffiti there with like DOH beside it. So that's been going on for a long time. I don't know who started the crew, who was all in that, but that's Ren. And if you look at it, he's got that sort of 1980s sort of style with, the typical 1980s graffiti with, the bubbles in it and the stripes. And so if there is any of his work ever in Toronto, that's something that you want to, again, if you're aware of the graffiti culture, you really want to make sure that it's preserved, right? Because that's, history. So that's Ren. In about 1986, there was a graffiti writer, and her name was Bomba, and there definitely is a piece that she's done, and it's just outside of Kensington Market. And so I think it's pretty recent. It's not one of her older pieces, but it's just right across sort of from the food trucks. When we go to Graffiti Alley. So she was a friend of Ren, and I think that she wasn't part of, as far as I know, any sort of crew, but she was from Chile. She came to Toronto, and her father was a muralist, but so she's Bomba, so good for her. In 1986, we had a female writer. So in the 1980s, there was a writer named by the name of Scam. So he's got quite a bit of stuff in Graffiti Alley. So you can see the influence of Ren, and I think he was in DOH crew with Ren. Um, Now, a lot of Scam's influence also comes from his work from hip hop. He was a b-boy. And as far as I know, he did take graphic design in college. There's a graffiti supply store that's just around the corner. It's not a huge one, but it's just around the corner from Graffiti Alley, and he owns that. And so he's sort of stepped over into making a living from being a graffiti writer, having his graffiti store, selling his work at shows. So he's got quite a bit of work in Graffiti Alley. Again, he's got that very New York sort of 80s sort of influence. So now, because he's making a living from that, he's primarily a legal graffiti writer, right? Because again, everybody knows who he is. He's not anonymous anymore, which causes some controversy, I think, in Graffiti Alley. Only that I've seen that, he's been around for a long time, but I've seen some other writers sort of deface his work. So, I mean, he's respected for sure, and he's done quite a bit of stuff. So I think he also writes by the name of Gems, because I don't know that for a fact, but I see a lot of work that says Gems in Graffiti Alley, and it looks very similar to his style. One of the big people in Toronto is Quest. And if you see his work, it's very, when we talked about wild style, it's very wild style. It's very, very abstract. And we have a book at school that's like, I call it our graffiti Bible. It's all the different graffiti alphabets from graffiti writers all over the world. And the only Canadian writer that's in there is Quest. I think there's still a piece of his from quite a while ago, kind of not necessarily in Graffiti Alley, but in another area there. But I think he still does stuff, and I think what he does now, I think that he does a lot of woodworking and does a lot of sculpture and kind of uses his wild style sort of letters with big sculptures. So I think he's still doing a lot of really neat stuff. But again, it's not necessarily easy to find a lot of information on graffiti writers. One of the staples in Graffiti Alley is that you're going to see is a guy named Poser. So by definition, graffiti is only graffiti if it has letters, because graffiti is all about writing. So anything else is either going to be a mural or street art. But sometimes what graffiti writers do is they put a character in with their graffiti, and just having that character is another way of, I mean, again, I'm assuming this is just kind of making their stuff more recognizable than just having their name. So Poser has this whole thing about his bunnies, and as far as I know, it's sort of the idea is these rabbits sort of replicate all over the city and sort of taking over, and they're always doing these really neat poses, and you're going to find these like little rabbits sort of hidden in really neat places. But as a graffiti writer, I mean, I really like his stuff. He has got some pretty cool way of he does his lettering, and I've seen him do some collaborations with some other writers and street artists, and so anyway, so as a graffiti writer, I think he's pretty cool. So so in our virtual tour, we're going to actually see this there, and this is this mural here, and it's still there. So from our local crew, or GH crew, which is the Golden Horseshoe crew, here's a piece done by Globe, so you're going to see a lot of his work. And normally he's the one that will give the tour to us. So this is a collaboration between Globe, Smokey, and Dunn. So, and then Globe, it's something that I want you to, around the Oshawa area, like all the way from here to Toronto, to have a look out for a lot of Globe's pieces, because you see quite a bit of his work. And then Dunn, who I think is, yeah, he must be still in the GH crew, like one of my other favorite graffiti writers. So he's got a few beautiful pieces in Graffiti Alley and all over Toronto. And so again, keep an eye out for some of his stuff. I know he's got some stuff in Pickering. I don't know how much he's got around here. I know he had some stuff once at Donovan Skate Park in Oshawa here, but I love his color use. I love his style, the way he does his letters. I think he also goes by the name of Cawt, C-A-W-T, because I only know just from, I don't know this for sure, but just from looking at some of Cawt's work, it's very similar sort of in the style and the lettering. So one of my ultimate favorite graffiti writers, and I don't know if he's any part of crew or anything like that, and I think he's around from the Pickering area, but I don't know for sure. But his name is Bacon, and again, I just have so much respect for his color use, the way he does his letters, and just the way that his spray can use is just unbelievable. And I almost met him once. I feel like I'm stalking him, but just one of my ultimate favorite writers. And one of my favorite pieces that he did was in Kensington Market. I don't think it's there anymore, the lower one, and it's just, if you can see, it says Bacon, but just there was a character, you can't really see it, but it's the Pink Panther, and all this is letters is like smoke coming from the Pink Panther cigarette, and just his spray paint can use is just unbelievable for me, and just how creative he is with his lettering. So there's quite a few pieces around Kensington Market that he's done, and was at one point quite a few pieces in Graffiti Alley. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff was covered up. Another one of my favorite writers, and somebody that I think that he's from the Toronto area, but I don't know if he's part of the GH crew or not. I have no idea, but his name is Media. And he's got a really neat way of working. And I met him years ago at Donovan Skate Park. He did a piece there, and he does use spray paint, but he also, a lot of those hard edges, he does some really neat things with like paint markers, and just unbelievable the way that he works. And he does quite a bit of stuff. So I've seen the stuff sort of here and there, but that's Media. I don't know if Water is part of the GH crew, but I know I've seen some of his stuff sort of with some of the other GH crew guys. But this is Water, and if you look closely, and you can see the word water out of it, and he really has this amazing 3D style. And I think, for me, I think this goes very well with sort of 3D graphics. And as far as I know, I think he actually, that's his background, is doing special effects and stuff on the computer. And I think I've seen some of his stuff where he's actually digitally made these things and had them floating in space. And he's done some really, really neat stuff. But another writer that I completely respect and I just think is incredible. And I would love to meet one day. Now, there's lots more graffiti writers that are in Graffiti Alley, and they're changing all the time. And it's something that's hard to find out who they are and find out information about them. And contrast to that is I've included some street art and muralists in Graffiti Alley, because what's happening is the Graffiti Alley is really changing. There's still a lot of graffiti there, but it's sort of been taken over by a lot of sort of murals and street artists. And the reason why there's a lot more information about street artists and muralists is because they're not seen as much as illegal. And, so they can have like websites with their real names on it and their contact information, which is, and their biography and everything. And that's something that you don't necessarily have about graffiti writers. So one writer or artist that you're going to see is Lovebot. And you have to have a look out for either just that sort of mechanical heart or some of his characters. And some of his characters take on other personalities, and he collaborates with some other artists. And so you're going to see Lovebot all over the city, not just in Graffiti Alley. But I think this started off as an art project years ago where he made these concrete Lovebots, and he posted them all over the city where places where people had done sort of good deeds. And he's really taken off with this idea behind that, and changing his character and marketing his work, and and just having that heart. It's very versatile because he makes shirts from that, it's logos. I mean, he just a lot of really, really neat stuff in terms of stencils and murals and t-shirts and concrete sculptures. And so it's a really, really neat idea, and he's really sort of gone with it, and he's exploring it. Now, we have to talk about Uber 5000 if we talk about Graffiti Alley. So Uber 5000, as far as I know, is a graphic designer. I'm sure it's easy to find out his real name. He's well known for these little happy sort of chick characters, and I see quite a bit of his stuff sort of around OCAD, the Ontario College of Art Design. So I imagine he kind of either went to school there or lives around there or hangs out there a lot. And he's got quite a bit of stuff in Graffiti Alley, and it sort of wasn't always that way, but just over the past few years, a lot of his stuff is there. So you will see some of his chicks sort of hidden here and there amongst, graffiti. But, building owners have a choice to have whatever they want on their buildings. And so he's been commissioned to do quite a bit of stuff. This is his recent one. We've seen it a few times. This is a huge mural about Toronto, and there's lots of stuff we could talk about for it. This is one that he did a while ago. And this is where some of my favorite bacon pieces once were, but they were covered up now. But with this, his cheek chicks and, hockey, and there's black lights on it and glows in the dark, and, so happy and nice. But people really like it. It talks about Toronto, and it's nice. It's not necessarily like street art, like it has a deep message. It's just sort of talking, nice stuff, But this is one of his original pieces, as far as I know, in Graffiti Alley that he did. I imagine that was commissioned because it's so large, This is one of the most famous ones, and this is sort of the one that everybody sort of gets their picture taken when they go to Graffiti Alley. So there's no chicks or anything in this, but again, it's a style of like quirky style with its fish, and it's the whole entire building, and we'll see that in the tour, virtual tour anyway. And I think this talks about the diversity of Toronto. I'm not really sure, but again, street art with a message, but sort of a safe message, right? Nothing really controversial, nothing really deep, just kind of a nice, happy little, message that everybody sort of likes, and that's what sort of draws tourists. Okay, I want to talk about Elixir because quite a bit of his stuff is in Graffiti Alley, Kensington Market, and actually throughout Toronto. And in the past, when we've gone on to some of these tours, we usually met at something called the Hug Tree, which is just outside of Graffiti Alley. Now, originally this tree was painted by Elixir with Hug on it, not Hug Me, and painted it all the time. And hug, I can't remember what it stands for, but it is a graffiti crew. So it wasn't meant to be like a, telling you to hug the tree. It was actually as a graffiti crew. But people started seeing it that way, and it sort of evolved. People were hugging it, and he kept repainting it, and it sort of evolved that way. And just to demonstrate the difference between the way that street art is viewed and graffiti art is viewed, just to contrast that. And so this hug tree was there for quite a while. A few years ago, they had to do construction in that area, and they had to move the hug tree. And of course, a lot of people were very upset that they were removing this hug tree. And so they actually removed it, preserved it, put it in, I think it was the ROM for a while until it was able to go back to its original spot. So, like street art then is, they've gone to great lengths to protect it. So we've seen like artists like Uber, they're getting commissioned, they get full buildings, and it's preserved and it's important and, to the public, and, Elixir's work, this tree, to great lengths. Whereas, a lot of graffiti writers are getting charged with vandalism, and, so there's a huge contrast. So that's why there's a battle sort of between graffiti writers and street artists always, anywhere you go, and perhaps maybe in Graffiti Alley. So Elixir is a muralist because, a lot of his stuff doesn't necessarily have, words in it. But he's also a street artist, and very different from Uber 5000, where he is commissioned for his stuff, but his work has more of a social, political message, whereas Uber is sort of, the happy, kind of nice view of Toronto. So Elixir stuff, I don't know, characteristically, I just find it's like these harsh, outlines. And so this piece, I think, is now painted over. I can't remember by who, but this is in Graffiti Alley. But again, he's going to have quite a bit of his work. Now, I've seen sort of a lot of his murals sort of get vandalized by graffiti writers, and this argument, saying that he's not a graffiti writer, this isn't graffiti, and not that he's claiming to be. I think, at one point he was a graffiti writer, and I think that maybe he's transitioned to that, just because I know that he was part of a crew, and so I don't know where sort of he stands like that, but now he seems to be more of a muralist, street artist. So he's commissioned for some things he's not, but he seemed to do quite a bit of work. So now another artist that you're going to see in Graffiti Alley is Jairus, and he just does incredible stuff. So this is one of his well-known pieces that you see, and it was commissioned, it's protected, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Now, Jairus is definitely a muralist. He uses spray paint, and he does a lot of portraits, and his stuff is just incredible. You're going to see it throughout Toronto, and I think he works internationally, but this is all freehand spray paint. And I've actually watched quite a few YouTube videos by Jairus just to see how he does it, and it's just unbelievable. So I'm assuming that he has like a fine art sort of training background, and then his medium is, spray paint. So he's done some pretty neat stuff. He's done tributes to some people. He's done sort of icons in Toronto, and he's done some really, really neat stuff. Another one of my favorite sort of artists is Nick Sweetman. And again, I really respect his ability to use spray paint very painterly. So he's done quite a few murals in and about Toronto. I would assume that he's more of a muralist. Maybe he's been commissioned for some stuff. Again, I don't know a whole lot about him. I was hoping that I would meet him at one of our Paint the Park things at Donovan Skate Park, but it didn't work out. But again, these are sort of my personal preferences. I admire the way that he uses his spray paint. He does some really neat stuff. I've seen some collaborations between him and Bacon, and the piece on the left with the fish was in Graffiti Alley for quite a while, and I think now it's painted over, but he's some really neat stuff. Now, just on a side note here, just some local writers that are in the area, so that you're going to see sort of from Oshawa all the way into Graffiti Alley. Some of them you're going to see actually in Graffiti Alley, but I just wanted to give you some background about just some of them, and just, what to look for when you're walking around and you're driving around and you see some things. And again, I am no expert on any of these people or on local graffiti. These are just, again, from sort of talking to people, watching, following, as much as I can on Instagram. But again, it's not necessarily like you can research any of these things online. It's hard to get this information. One of my favorite human beings and artists that I respect totally the most is Sons. And he now lives out in Alberta. But he's such a good artist, graffiti artist, and he does some great stuff. So he's part of GH Crew. So I think there's a piece right now at Donovan Skate Park by him. So he must have come, for a visit, because he was living in the area for a while. I think he was living in Pickering, so he must have come for a visit and did some pieces. So, but I really admire the work that he's done. He's really done a lot of work out in Alberta where he lives now, and he's never said no whenever you've ever asked him for any help to help with our program, or he's done a lot for our community. So somebody that I really respect. So Looter, he goes by many names. So again, part of GH Crew, which is Golden Horseshoe Crew. So you're going to see a few of his pieces locally around. I think he's got something at Donovan Skate Park right now. I think a lot of and again, I don't know for sure. I'm assuming a lot of the GH Crew, I think they're very much a train crew. So you see a lot of the stuff on trains. So you'll see a lot of Nomis's stuff. Don't know much about him. Met him once, saw him once, and yeah, so he's got quite a bit of stuff everywhere, and I find that whatever you see Nomis, you see Nora as well. Again, I'm assuming more of a train crew, but you're going to see like a lot of stuff under bridges. They seem to work really hard and they're everywhere, which is every skate park, every bridge, so a lot of respect that way. Sizo, someone else I see sort of around. I see a lot of like big walls and this done by a lot of these people, these writers kind of done all together, but I really like his work as well. Part of the GH Crew, I'm assuming, and I'm assuming more also part of that train sort of thing. Again, I don't know much about any of these people, and this is just from, watching and learning. So these are some of the things to sort of look out for in our virtual tour. These are some of the things to look out for in your area. If you're going to any of the skate parks, you're driving around, you're looking anywhere, but just kind of a bit of a background. And again, I'm not an expert on any of this. This is just sort of what I've learned over the years. So what I'd like you to do now is I would like you to look at our virtual Graffiti Alley tour and see how many are these artists that you recognize, just so you know what you're looking for. Okay?